Ever heard that saying, a good leader takes you where you want to go, but a great leader, they take you where you need to be, even if you don't even know it yet. And that's what we're diving into today, the kind of leadership that builds armies ready for anything, that can handle whatever's thrown at them. We're talking ADP 622, Chapter 9. It's like the Army's playbook, right, for organizational leadership.
That's it. And this isn't just some like dusty old manual that nobody even looks at. This chapter really lays the foundation for, well, how the Army expects its leaders to, at all levels, how they should think about their roles, especially in such a complex world.
And it really just jumps right into it, doesn't it? The chapter, it starts with that quote from General George C. Marshall. You have to lead men in war by requiring more from the individual than he thinks he can do. I mean, wow. No pressure, right?
Yeah, no kidding. But it really does set the tone for the entire chapter. It's about pushing beyond those limitations, what we think is possible, both for the soldiers under your command, but also for yourself as a leader.
So, okay, let's break down, like, what does organizational leadership really even mean in this context? Because I feel like it's got to be more than you know, just giving orders all the time,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Think of it more like bridging the gap between like the big strategic picture, those overall mission objectives, and then actually making it happen, the boots on the ground execution. So you're taking those high level concepts from headquarters, and then you have to figure out how to actually turn them into plans, concrete plans that your teams can understand and actually execute.
Yeah.
Effectively, of course.
So it's like, okay, say the mission is to take that hilltop, that really important one. Organizational leadership is about figuring out, yeah, we got to take the hill, but like how are we going to do it? What about the logistics, the timing? How do we make sure all these different units are working together? Oh, and by the way, you have to keep your soldiers motivated and on the same page through the whole thing.
You got it. That's exactly it. It's about setting the conditions for success. And that's at every level, not just teaching individual skills, but building that cohesive team, the kind where everybody trusts each other and knows, what their role is, how they fit into the bigger picture.
Right. And something else Chapter 9 really stresses is this isn't just about leading within your platoon or even your company. It's about influence that goes way beyond your typical chain of command. So what do they mean by that? What does that look like?
Well, think about the kinds of situations, the challenges that we're facing these days. I mean, you might have a platoon and they're operating as part of a larger brigade, but then they're also working alongside, maybe Air Force, Navy, who knows, could even be international forces, trying to like coordinate with them. You might even need to engage with the local population, especially if it's a foreign country.
Whoa. Okay. So that is a lot more hats to wear than I think people realize.
Exactly, yeah. And that's a big part of why organizational leadership at this level, it requires such a wider skill set, I guess. You're talking about like diplomacy skills, negotiation.
Right.
You've got to understand cultural nuances even to build those relationships. Those are essential.
So what you're saying is it's not enough to just be a great platoon leader anymore.
Mm.
You need to understand how your platoon, how it fits into like the larger Army picture, even globally.
That's the reality, yeah. That's the modern battlefield. It's more connected than ever. I mean, a decision that's made at the platoon level, that could have ripple effects across, I don't know, continents even.
So the stakes are definitely higher, right? And the playing field is like way bigger. You got a lot more players to think about than maybe you used to.
Mm.
But there's this interesting thing in ADP 622. It talks about how organizational leaders, they need to stay close to the action, but then it's like don't micromanage. So how do you even walk that line?
Yeah, that's one of the probably the toughest skills to really master, finding that balance. It's really about finding that sweet spot between like presence, you got to be present, and empowerment. You can't just be, stuck in headquarters somewhere, got to be visible, engaged, especially with your troops, right?
Yeah.
That's how you build that trust and you get a feel for what's actually happening on the ground. Make sure that your intent, what you want to happen, is really understood.
Okay, so lead from the front, but
But you got to trust the training that you've instilled in your people and the people you're leading. You have to empower them to make decisions, to really own their roles. You know what I mean? If you're always like right there looking over their shoulder, questioning every single thing, it kills initiative. It
Yeah.
really does. And it creates this culture of like fear instead of trust.
yeah, and that's got to be demoralizing for everybody.
Oh, for sure. Nobody wants to feel like they're not trusted, and micromanaging, it really sends that message like you don't believe in your team's ability. And that just erodes their confidence. And ultimately, it hurts performance. And remember, we're talking about developing leaders here, not just managing tasks. We're trying to grow people.
Right, building for the future. And actually, ADP 622 uses this phrase that I really like. It calls organizational leaders stewards of the Army profession. So what does that even look like? When you say it like that, I mean, what are we really talking about?
Well, it means, think bigger. You're not just leading soldiers to accomplish some task, some mission. Your impact is way bigger than that because you're also shaping the future of the Army by how you develop the people coming up behind you, the next generation. That's how you make a real difference.
So, okay, so how do you steward the profession? I mean, that sounds like a big job. What would you tell somebody?
It's like, okay, you lead soldiers, right? But you're developing leaders. That's the key. That's the difference. So what does that mean? That means create a culture of like always learning. We're always learning, right? So you encourage things like 360 assessments where, you're getting feedback not just from the people above you, but from your peers, even the people you're, leading.
Oh, that's interesting. So you get a much better, more well-rounded picture of, strength, weaknesses where you can improve.
Okay.
And not just from, the higher ups.
Right, exactly. And it opens up communication.
Yeah.
Makes things more transparent. Stewarding the profession, it also means, you actively mentor your people, the people you lead. Give them those opportunities to grow. Recommend them for training, whatever they need to develop professionally. Be their advocate.
So you're always looking for that potential, even when maybe they don't see it in themselves yet.
Yeah, you give them the tools, right, and the opportunities. You never know who might surprise you, who might become this, like, amazing leader down the line.
The long game.
It is, for sure. But it's worth it. It's an investment for the individual, but for the Army as a whole. Everybody wins.
So we've talked about like the WHY of all of this, this whole organizational leadership thing,
Yeah.
developing those future leaders, making the Army stronger, more effective. But what about the how, right? How do all these principles, how do they actually play out when it's time to, achieve the mission?
Yeah.
On the ground where it matters?
Well, it all comes down to understanding that really every single decision you make, every resource you decide to use, every order you give, it all like ripples outward. It all affects the bigger picture in ways you might not even, realize at the time. And chapter 9, it really digs into some key areas where organizational leadership is like essential. Take resource management, for example. You've got what you've got, right? Limited budget, limited personnel, never enough time, and you've got to decide how to use those resources to make the biggest impact. And those are tough decisions.
Especially, let's be real, when things go wrong, which, I mean, come on, happens all the time out in the field.
All the time, yeah. That's when, you really find out what you're made of as a leader. You got to be able to adapt, think on your feet, get creative to solve those problems, but never lose sight of that objective. That's what a good organizational leader does.
So you're thinking on your feet, but you're also thinking like 10 steps ahead. And I'm guessing that whole systems thinking thing that ADP 622 talks about,
Yeah.
that's got to be a big part of it.
Huge, absolutely. Organizational leaders, they can't afford to have like tunnel vision. They have to get it, how everything connects, the different units, the logistics side of things, intel, even the political landscape, right? You got to factor all of that in because it all affects each other.
So like, just as for instance, you've got this delay in getting supplies to your platoon. Okay, that's not just like a little logistics hiccup. I mean, that could delay the entire operation. What about the units that are depending on you, the ones on your flank? It could even, depending on the situation, have like political ramifications. Who knows?
You got to connect those dots, right? You anticipate what's going to happen, those ripple effects, and then you adjust.
And ADP 622 really emphasizes this point that good organizational leaders are always assessing, always looking for ways to improve, to do things better next time.
It's huge. It's not enough to just, go through the motions, check the boxes. You got to actively seek out that feedback, look at the data, and be humble enough to admit when you could have done something better. And that might be after action reviews. It might be just talking to your team, getting their honest feedback, or just taking some time to, reflect on how it went. Could be anything. But it's like an ongoing process, always learning, always refining.
So it's never really mission accomplished. It's more like, okay, mission accomplished, but what did we learn? How can we crush it even harder next time?
There you go. Because the one thing you can count on is change, right? Things are always changing, and the Army needs leaders who can not only roll with it, but be the ones pushing things forward. In a good way, of course.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, some pretty high-level stuff. But for those listening who are maybe thinking, okay, I get it, this is all great, but where do I even start?
Mm.
If you could give them like one key thing to take away from ADP 622 and really focus on in their leadership journey, what would it be?
You know, if I had to pick just one thing, it's this. Invest in your people. Always. Remember, it's not just about leading soldiers, it's about like shaping the future.
Hmm.
You're shaping the future of the Army. So create that culture of learning, empower the people you lead, and never, ever stop looking for ways to grow. For them and for you.
Because when it comes down to it, the strength of the Army depends on the strength of its leaders. Every single one.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's really what ADP 622 is all about, giving those leaders at every level the tools and the mindset to build that stronger, more effective Army, ready for whatever comes next.